Our guest tonight is Riley Scott. Riley, welcome to Dogman Encounters Radio. Thanks so much for coming.
Well, thank you for having me on, Vic.
Thanks for being here. Give us a brief bio, please.
I'm 36 years old, so I guess that makes me born in 78. I come from the Highlands of Scotland, specifically a part on the northeast called Murrayshire. I'm an Air Force brat, and pretty much grew around the Air Force base my father was stationed at. I guess I lived there up until about the age of 18 or 19. I did all my education within Scotland. Well, at least all my basic education within Scotland. Before moving to, I probably went straight to London from there. And took some further education in psychology and criminology, specifically. Before entering work in the defense sector. And then some law enforcement after that, and a little of the aviation security work also. Currently, I'm consulting to military and law enforcement across Europe, but I'm stuck in the States at the moment because I'm recovering from a rather bad injury, broken or shattered kneecap. I just had reconstruction surgery, so right now I'm just watching an awful lot of Netflix and having lots of physical therapy, which is basically torture you pay for.
Not fun being laid up like that, especially for someone like you that's so used to being active. Now, Riley, you've never told your story before with regards to your Dogman encounter. Why now? Why did you decide to come out and tell it?
Well, there's a slight detail there. I have told it previously, but I know this, you're the only person I've told this to. When we briefly spoke before, but the previous times I've told it, perhaps 5 or 6, I've told it from the third person. I've told it to my friend, saying that this happened to my friend when he was younger, and that's basically because I know how people can be about these things. I was just trying to avoid the suspicious looks and the sniggering and the ridicule that can come with these things, because it's very difficult to come back from that. Especially if it's work colleagues and things. That sort of thing can really haunt you. And it was a tactical move on my part. So as dishonest as it was a tactical white lie, I suppose. But it's quite frankly, especially within the UK and the culture I was raised in, it's not the sort of thing you would bring up over casual conversation.
You mentioned that haughty nature of Brits before in our conversations. Could you talk about that a little bit as compared to the people here in the U.S. that you've met?
Absolutely. Unfortunately, Brits still seem to have this, and I know this is a very broad brush to paint over any demographic, but as a huge part or a huge percentage of the British population that still seem to live with this delusion of us having this grand empire across the whole of the globe. And it's just an inbuilt snobbery and a real sense of xenophobia. It's almost like a casual racism, but that goes for intellectual traits as well. It's a very strange place. I only learned this, obviously. I didn't realize how strange it was until I started traveling. And once I started traveling around Europe, I guess I've been to most of Europe, and I live here in Miami, Florida now. It's only when I've been exposed to other cultures, and I love the culture within the United States. The people are so much more open. They're less guarded in general. And like I said, it's a huge culture shock. And when I go back to visit, I'm going to have to moderate the way I talk and the things I say, because, like I said, it's an inherent snobbery. But one thing I can say for sure, nobody likes to see you doing well or better than them, and nobody likes attention or limelight on anyone other than them. So people are very quick to shoot you down if you're interesting or even remotely controversial. I know I'm painting a pretty pessimistic picture of it, but those are the facts, I'm afraid. But I still love the United Kingdom, and more specifically my country, Scotland. But unfortunately, that's the truth.
Even in the most accepting environments with regards to the people that you surround yourself with, talking about a Dogman encounter is not an easy thing to do. If we're talking about being around people like that are that judgmental, I can only imagine what it must be like if they find out about what you've been through.
You make a very good point. And the big thing is, they seem to have a horrendously long memory. I recall as, oh God, I don't know, I must have been, 15 or 16 or something, and I was coming home late one night from, because we had to walk everywhere back then. Very safe, nice, open country. So it wasn't abnormal for us to be puttering around in the middle of the night on our own. So I was coming home one evening alone with one of my dogs. It was a really gusty and windy evening, and I saw a light traveling quite low, and it appeared to be going through the top of the forest along the treetops. And being intimately familiar with aircraft, because my father was a pilot in the Royal Air Force, I tried to figure out what this thing was. I couldn't come to a decision, so I just brushed it off and went home. I made the mistake of mentioning this to a friend and my brothers, and I was the butt of jokes for about 10 years after that, Vic. I didn't claim it was a bloody flying saucer or anything like that. All I said was it was a strange light, because it appeared strangely at the time. And I was the butt of jokes for about 10 years with my family and that particular friend. So, once bitten, twice shy.
Yeah, I can't say I'll blame you after being through something like that. If you come forward and get that reaction after having mentioned a much more common phenomenon, just a light in the sky, that's right. I can only understand why you were reluctant to come forward and talk about seeing a dog man out in the woods. That's perfectly understandable.
And, again, I'm not sure if I mentioned this to you, but it's only now I'm saying this out loud, I realize how silly these things sound. And how implausible these things sound, but I guess, this is what that show's about. One of the reasons I decided to contact you was because some of the guests you had on previously, in fact, all the guests you had on previously were so compelling. Especially I can't remember her name, but one of the young ladies you had on recently, she sounded quite tortured by this thing. And she said that, how she was afraid to tell people, and she thought she might be crazy or something like this. And I thought, if I can throw a little bit of support and reassurance in that general direction by fessing up, and coming out with my, albeit brief, encounter, I'd like to do that. I've spent my whole life in service of others, when I worked in defense and then law enforcement, and it's always been about, I've always ended up in some way responsible for other people's safety or well-being, even emotional well-being. And like I said, especially working in law enforcement, and, I was in several situations where I was working with refugees of, specifically the conflict in the former Yugoslavia. So I know genuine torture and genuine, post-traumatic stress when I hear it. And like I said, specifically one of the young ladies you had on, I could hear how deeply affected she had been by her encounter. And like I said, I guess my prime motivation was just to bolster it, to give people a little company saying, yeah, well, this guy from all the way across the middle of nowhere, in a country we don't have things like bears, we don't have wolves, we don't have anything like that. So there can be no doubt about misidentification. I just thought maybe, a guy with a silly accent from the United Kingdom telling a very similar encounter may, it just might help them have a little more faith in themselves, perhaps. Maybe encourage somebody else to contact you. And one of the other things that I mentioned briefly to you was, I actually, and again, I don't want to sound like a pansy or anything, but I felt an awful lot better after I initially spoke to you. Because I'd never gotten off my chest, admitting that it was me that saw this thing instead of my friend. So, and my friend wasn't even bloody there. This is the thing. I just always posed it as a third person because, like I said, I suppose I didn't have the courage to stand up for it myself, put my name behind that material. Because, you have to admit, it's a hell of a story. Any story regarding a dog man is a hell of a story. And it's a hell of a thing for me to accept too. I have a good understanding of physiology and, cellular reproduction and all. A good foundation in, biology and the sciences. I know almost for certain that you can't transmutate one creature into another creature. So, I don't believe this is, what I thought was a man that it transformed into, like the classic werewolf. But then, I have to ask myself all these questions. Well, why don't we find dead corpses of these things lying around? How many would you have to sustain a population? The food sources. I ask myself all these questions. So it's very difficult for me to accept on a level where I'm comfortable speaking to somebody else about it. And, and incidentally, I shoot myself down with that same thing. So the first time anyone talks about a strange creature or, an unknown creature, there's, a cryptid, I believe. In fact, I learned that. I owe you that. I learned that from your show, a cryptid. You would expect to find dead ones lying occasionally. But how often do you see dead birds? How often do you come across a dead bird? And there's tens of thousands of them in every, square 5-10 miles or so. I all think that's a good point.
As always, Riley, you make some very good points there. I want to make a few points of my own before we start talking about the encounter that you had. First of all, I think one of the reasons why you've had the amount of trouble that you've had dealing with that encounter is because you're such a logical man.
I'm the type of chap that can't even go to bed on an unresolved argument. I have to sort things out there and then, so I can clear my mind for other more important tasks. And especially when you've had training in the classical sciences, when all of a sudden you encounter something or you see something, you just can't justify it in your own mind, and you can't rationalize it. I guess rationalize is the correct word. It's very difficult because it's a horrible thing, but if you do come to accept that is, I have come to accept I saw something bloody strange, then your mind starts thinking, what else might be real? What else might be out there? You can't even blame it on the whole flying saucer stuff, because that's very easy to say, well, I'm open-minded and there's, billions of stars in our galaxy. That's something you can easily dismiss, but, something that shares the Earth with us, something that treads the same dirt as we tread, that is horrifically intimidating and psychologically more formidable than anything else I've ever seen. I mean, I've seen lions and tigers, be it in zoos, but I've seen all that stuff, and it's a whole different ball game, as you guys say, bumping into one of those things. And one more thing, I know this, especially for a logical and rational man, as you put it, it never occurred to me there might be more than one until I stumbled upon your podcast.
Sorry about that.
How ridiculous is that? It never occurred to me there might be more than one, and I don't know what I was bloody thinking. But again, it's not something I've dwelt on. It's one of those things that just tends to pop up when you hear a creepy story or an unusual story. That little thing flags up in your mind, thinking, I had something like that would blow your story out of the water, but I'm probably not going to share it with you. Just to save face.
Oh, that's understandable. Back to the whole logical thing, being logical and pragmatic, that's normally a good thing, but as far as an eyewitness goes, that type of person, in my opinion, is the type of person that normally is going to have the most amount of trouble getting over an encounter. Having said that, I want to move on to something else too. You're an other-directed man, Riley. Most people would have focused on getting better a lot more so than what you did. You focused on, like I said, other people's needs at the expense of your own. Now that we've been talking about your situation, that encounter that you had, I hope we can turn that around and get you back to good sooner rather than later. And also, too, touching on that topic, I'm so glad to hear that our talk about the encounter that you had is helping you. That's really good news.
Well, modesty prevents me from agreeing entirely. I can't say I've sacrificed. I don't go to sleep with a cross every night. Let's put it that way. I'm not a martyr for everyone, but I suppose there is an element of truth there. Especially in the armed forces, and I have huge respect for the armed forces of the United States. Having worked with you guys on and off over the years, I was always extremely impressed with the quality, the caliber of the personnel that you guys managed to produce time upon time upon time. However, what I would say, going back to, me being the suffragette, as it would be, it's always a very conscious decision. When you're a bit more capable, or you deem yourself more capable, more mentally robust, the onus and the responsibility is kind of, morally it's on you to soak up as much crap as you can to protect others from said crap. So, it's a very conscious decision. But I appreciate the thought of my soon-to-be martyrdom.
You're welcome. You're quite welcome.
I was actually surprised because it was a sort of moment of madness contacting you, and I was surprised when you responded so quickly to my email. And when we realized we could talk, I believe it was the same day, that I didn't have a chance to think about what I was going to say to you. I didn't have a chance to think about how I was going to represent it. And halfway through our chat, I started to feel really silly. I sort of got cold feet halfway, and I thought, as I heard myself sing this out loud, which I've only done a few times in the past, and never from my point of view, as I told you, I told it from my friend's point of view previously, hearing it out loud for the first time, I suppose, like that, I suddenly realized how ridiculous and implausible it sounded, and thinking, this guy's never going to believe this stuff. Despite the fact you've been churning out this wonderfully produced podcast, by the way, for all this time, I suddenly was terrified. I thought, this guy's not going to believe this nonsense. It sounds like crap. It just sounds unbelievable even to me. I was surprised about how therapeutic it was afterwards,
Through the course of that conversation we had that day, I could tell that you felt bad about, you were almost embarrassed about the details that you were sharing with me, and I felt so bad for you because I knew you were telling the truth. There's a certain flow that real eyewitnesses have when they're telling you about the encounters that they have had.
Having worked in law enforcement, you can tell when people are spinning you a line. You really can. You can pick it up straight away. If you ever had any exposure to habitual lies or compulsive lies, they're instantaneously visible.
Yeah, there's no denying that. I still get my share of phonies that contact me and try and spin a yarn about some encounter they supposedly had. It's almost amazing that they don't realize how easy it is to see right through them. When I have someone like you who is genuine contact me and is obviously in pain with regards to what they've been through. During that conversation, I could clearly tell that you were embarrassed as you were relaying the details of that encounter. I felt so bad. You handled that encounter the best way you could. I tried to make sure you understood that you should not be embarrassed about anything to do with that encounter.
Like I said, it was the strangest thing. Because it's not so much the disbelief, it's more the ridicule element. And like I said, probably the first time I've ever heard myself say it out loud. And as you go into more and more detail about it, and you start to recall things as you're remembering, especially if you haven't thought about it for quite a while, and you start making little mental links. And as I'm talking to you, absolutely candidly, that little voice in your head says, this sounds absolutely nonsensical. And again, the logical part of your brain says, this man has not only dealt with people that have had similar experiences, but he's gone to great lengths to publicize this and again to produce a very professional podcast. So, the man is obviously mentally equipped to deal with these retellings of these experiences. But there's that little voice that says, this sounds mental. It just sounds mental. But anyway, there we are.
That's only human nature that you would have felt that way. That's understandable there. Yeah, when we were talking about your encounter, the whole time as you kept apologizing about how strange it sounded, I kept thinking to myself, well, please don't feel bad because I've heard stories that were even more extraordinary than the encounter that you had. Thank goodness your encounter wasn't worse than it was. It was bad enough, though, without a doubt. Now, having said that, Riley, let's get into the details of your encounter. I want to hear the who, what, where, when. please start from the very beginning and go forward from there.
Okay. I must have been 10 or 11. It's certainly before high school, because you tend to join high school in the UK when you're 11 or 12. So I wasn't at high school quite, but it must have been just before. My father had another military friend. So my father was a squadron leader, eventually wing commander to our Air Force. And he had this British Army major who was his friend, Frank. They're great friends and, equal to each other for being in different branches of the military. So, the Air Force hate the Army and the Army hate the Air Force. So, good sparring partners, I suppose you would call them. On this particular occasion, Frank had met my father at our family home. And they had arranged to then go on from there to another friend's house. It was perhaps a mile, maybe a mile and a half away. Most of it through woodland. So you can see where this is going straight away. So, me being the type of guy I was at the time, being 10 or 11 years old and idolizing my father, the fighter pilot, absolutely idolizing him, made a real nuisance of myself until I convinced my father to let me go along with him. And it was an adult thing, and there certainly would have been other children there because the friend we were visiting did have a family. So, they were just basically going for drinks and shenanigans, the way the people tend to do when they're, adult and retired or semi-retired. So, I talked my father into letting me go with him, and, we trailed off, through the woods and over a couple of little hills up in Scotland to my father's friend's house. And, I proceeded to have the most boring evening of my entire life because it was very adult. There was nobody babysitting us. They were all drinking fine malt scotch, and, there was very little laid on for children, as nobody was expecting children there. So I think I spent most of the evening drinking tea and sitting close to a fire, an open fire, and, being thoroughly pissed off with myself for insisting to come along. Because we probably left the house about 8 o'clock, and this stretched on well past midnight. And without wanting to, show myself up for not having the stamina to keep up with my father, as I was warned I wouldn't do. You'll only want to come home, boy, was what he was saying. I was like, no, absolutely, trying to be the big man at my tender age. Without wanting to prod him to go home and admit I was tired or sleepy or bored or pissed off, fearing that I wouldn't get invited the next time, of course. Terribly boring even. So I was very, very pleased to see the jackets go on at the end of the evening, and the last of the drinks drained. Fantastic. So I spring back to life, ready for the walk home through the forest. So my father and Frank are walking slightly ahead of me, and they're retelling all the war stories that's just being told in the confines of my friend's father's house. Sorry, retold in the confines of my father's friend's house. And, they've had a bit to drink, so that everything's really nice. The atmosphere is nice and warm. And, I am trailing slightly behind because in the United Kingdom, when horse chestnuts drop from trees, young people collect them, and we drill a hole through the center of them and put a string through there. And, the game's called Conkers. I don't know if you guys have it here, but we tend to get the biggest, conkers or horse chestnuts we can find, and the whole goal of the game is to break your opponent's conker by striking, yours against his. So, this places this incidentally, in, late October, early November probably. So getting on to the winter, because that's when horse chestnuts drop to the ground. And as we're walking, as I'm trailing slightly behind and, being, coerced to catch up every now and then by my father, I can feel these, fantastic conkers crunching under my feet. But, due to the fact it's very dark, apart from, here we go, full moon. It's another detail that's going to sound ridiculous and cliche, but full moon. So every now and then, when there's a significant break in the tree canopy, I can see by the moonlight that there's some fantastic conkers out there that I want to collect and destroy my friend's conkers with. So, the walk continues, and like I said before, it's probably a mile and a half. And, I guess I must have only been trailing 3 or 4 meters behind my father and Frank. looking for, some good specimens of these bloody horse chestnuts. And as I discussed with you previously, I don't know if I heard something or if something caught the side of my eye, or the corner of my eye. But for some reason, I turned around and looked over my right shoulder, approximately the 4 or 5 o'clock position. And this is where I feel silly even saying this. I saw the time I thought to be a dog, and a bloody big dog, standing on its hind legs, peeking out from behind the trunk of a tree. I tried to sketch this after I talked to you, but it just looked so bloody Disney and Mickey Mouse. I kept scribbling out, because it just seemed so ridiculous when I saw it on paper. But, to define it better, I saw this, very much German Shepherd-like head, probably, and again, very difficult to tell heights, because I was very short back then. But I was certainly looking up, and I guess the range between me and the tree, this, whatever it was hiding behind, can't be more than 3-4 meters, so it was very close. And me being a small guy, it was a very intimidating situation, straight off. You had a horrible feeling where the ice cube explodes inside your chest, and your body starts to go through that sympathetic shock response. The big adrenaline dump and that fight, flight, or freeze situation. People always talk about the fight or flight response, but they always forget to add in the third and very common side effect of that, which is the freeze. When people say they're petrified, as in they've been turned to stone, the freeze is more and more common in the fight or flight response, because we're so socially conditioned these days. It's interesting because I guess that's what I had. I had this, I became rooted to this spot, and having this horrible focus and being drawn to this head of this, again, like a werewolf from a film. And I know how kooky that sounds, like a damn werewolf. And the thing is, I'm planning how I'm going to describe this to you right now. All I can see is classic werewolves from some of the better werewolf movies. Like there was I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but there was a British werewolf movie called Dog Soldiers.
Oh yeah.
And this, and obviously I saw this film way after, many years after this. But I didn't like that film very much because I had a distinct prickling of the flesh, because the head of certainly one of the puppets or whatever they used in that movie was so similar to what I saw. So just to recap, now that I'm less embarrassed, now that I've got to add, looking for the horse chestnuts, I either heard a sound or something caught the side of my eye, or perhaps a shadow, because this is at one of the breaks in the tree canopy, so there's a fair degree of moonlight. And it being a full moon, the cliche full moon, makes it even more ridiculous sounding. There's quite good visibility. And I see what's quite clearly, and what my juvenile mind apparently thought was a dog standing up on its hind legs, peeking, with its head cocked around the side of a tree, with a lot of fir trees in Scotland. And they're very broad trunks, peeking around the side of one of these fir trees. And the real kicker, and it still sounds ridiculous, even though I've mentioned this to you before, the real kicker is, if you can imagine how a human would peek around the side of a tree, there's not trying to be particularly covert. And if you imagine standing with your hands either side of a tree and leaning around and say to the right, and your right hand would perhaps wrap around the trunk of the tree a little bit, that's what I saw. And I use the word hand specifically because, a paw is a paw and a hand is a hand, and this was far closer to a hand than a paw. I mean, I'm looking at my German Shepherd's paw right now, and it's got nothing to do with the shape of my hand. There's no comparison there. Even if you scaled up her paw to the size of my hand, it still wouldn't look like a paw. A lion's paw doesn't look like a man's hand. In fact, years later, I watched the movie Aliens, and the aliens in that movie, they had these really long, spindly-looking hands. And that reminded me of that thing I saw. It was like a really long, almost like a caricature hand. You know? Again, I don't know how to describe it so that I'm happy with the way it sounds. But all I can do is say what retell what I saw. And, the classic thing, and I've heard it time and time again on your podcast, which is one of the reasons I got in touch. The classic thing, pricked up ears, like you'd see on a traditional wolf, pricked up ears. Very difficult to tell the color, Dick, because moonlight has a limited spectrum. The best I could guess was like a sooty, gray, black, like, kind of like if you got a black dog and it was kind of dirty, and it rolled around maybe in a coal pit for a while. The best impression I could get at the time was of a very mottled, gray, black fur. And again, the word fur is specific. Certainly not hair, it's more like a fur. Again, very much like my German Shepherd dog. And for trivia, I love German Shepherd dog so much. I raised her from a pup. She was 7.5 weeks old when I got her, and I was working in Germany at the time, so she's a German Shepherd. And she's one of the great loves of my life. Her name's Wolfarella, like Cinderella, but because she's wolfy. Ironically, I call my dog Wolf. How ridiculous is that? But every now and then, and bearing in mind, I'm a grown man, and I'm not a pansy, as you said before. I'm freely admitting that she's one of the greatest loves of my life. So this next thing I'm going to tell you is even tougher to say. Every now and then, when her head's at a certain angle, or she looks at me strangely, every now and then, she sends a bloody chill down my spine, because I get a little flash of that face that I saw poking around the side of that tree. And I know that this sounds bizarre, but that's a fact. And I'm not particularly happy about it, I have to say. I tend to try and hold myself to relatively high standards. And whenever I have a feeling, especially related to this, a feeling of, I have my father's voice in my head quite occasionally saying, "Come on, man, pull yourself together." Because everything was walk it off, pull yourself together when we were younger. But I get this all the time when I think about, I just think I should be better than this. Why am I dwelling on this? It's ridiculous. You're grown men, it's just very difficult to rationalize that with who you are. This essentially, I can't even call it an irrational fear, because I witnessed something very real, something very physical, extremely physical, and, when you look at an animal, you tend to lock eyes with it. You don't look at an alligator and look at its tail to stop it. You look at its eyes. And when you look at a dog, you tend to look at a dog's eyes, even though that's the wrong thing to do. And you get a sense of the creature by locking eyes with it. You look at an elephant and you get the idea it's benevolent and wise and gentle and, a generally nice creature. And you look at a giraffe and your eyes and very cute and everything, relatively harmless, it just munches leaves. Harmless unless you're a tree, that is. And when you lock eyes with something that you get the distinct impression could cause you grievous bodily harm, and worse than that, when you lock eyes with a creature that you know immediately could harm you greatly, not just based on the physicality of the animal, based on the fact that, predators have the eyes in the front of their head, and this thing very much had the eyes in the front of his head. And, I have to apologize for stumbling here, because, again, hearing myself say this, I feel a little silly at times. But there was a sort of casual disregard or lack of concern in what I got from locking eyes with this thing. Initially, it was a sort of, I got an impression of vexation or frustration or annoyance that it's almost like it was pissed off that I'd seen it. I know it sounds very strange, because humans very easily anthropomorphize animals. You know, we project our own feelings onto them, and we've got real no idea what they're thinking, really. I mean, we just simply have no idea how they're thinking and feeling a lot of the time. It's all guesses. But I always trust my gut. I always trust my gut. Having a good background in psychology, sociology, and criminology, and again, the acute stress response, the acute fear response in human beings, so the fight, flight, or freeze. And I always tell people this, especially, you know, I started telling them in classes when I was consulting to police, military, and then when we started, the company I work for started doing women's assault prevention, which is not women's self-defense. Women's self-defense, I tend to think it's a waste of time, because unless you have them for a couple of weeks continuously, they're very unlikely to be able to reproduce the skills you're teaching them in a stress situation. So I'm throwing that in there to show that I have a good understanding of the stress response of human beings. So I tell everyone now, that little tickly feeling you have in your stomach, that little butterfly or flip that you get, people refer to it as the gut. You know, I had a gut feeling. That is the first precursor to the fight or flight stimulus. That is, your digestive system in the human body takes up an awful lot of blood to operate. That's why you feel very sleepy after a huge meal, because a lot of the blood in your body is diverted to start digesting the food. So that weird tickle, that weird little flippy feel, that is the cessation of digestion. So your body recognizes subconsciously most of the time that there may be a very bad or critical situation about to occur. Something very old in your brain recognizes something that your higher brain doesn't see, and it takes the blood away from places it's not immediately needed, and it pumps them to your main muscle groups and the center of your eyes, so you get higher acuity in the center of your vision, which is some people call tunnel vision, but it's actually a heightened acuity in your eye. When you feel that, there's something real there, and there's a real threat. I also trust your gut, and that thing was working overtime that evening. That I'm not the sort of person that is very quick to believe in things like telepathy or psychic. I don't even know the terminology, psychic bloody communication. But I had an awful lot of emotion and intent transmitted when I locked eyes with this thing.
That's very commonly reported, Riley, from eyewitnesses, so that's not out of the norm. Through all this, I sure hope that at some point you are able to stop being so hard on yourself. You feel what you feel, and there's not much you can do about that. You're doing the best you can to deal with an extremely traumatic experience that you had at a very young age. You said you were around 11 years old or so when you had this encounter.
Yeah,
so,
10 or 11.
10 or 11, everything that you're going through is perfectly predictable almost. It's to be expected. Just do the best you can to deal with this, and no one could ask more from you.
Well, the big problem is, and this is the problem, I think, because I tend to think ignorance is bliss. I think because I have a working understanding of the way your brain works and the whole psychology of post-traumatic stress disorder, I think you sort of, it's almost like a negative placebo effect. I think, you know, you trouble yourself more with these things, but then being the guy that you are, you sort of harass yourself for feeling so weak about these things. And if I may go back to the encounter, I've just re-remembered a detail here. I had been following behind my father and behind Frank, and every now and then being coerced to catch up a little bit, as they were wrapped up in their own world of presumably delicious fine whiskey and war stories. And I'm constantly searching the floor for these horse chestnuts. Every time we get a break in the tree canopy, I have the opportunity to pause and look to see what I can actually glean for the next day's battles of Thor. And then my attention is drawn slightly behind me and slightly to my right, and very clearly, very, very clearly, seeing the impossible. Again, in fact, I keep saying at the time, but still, by today's standards, what I think you saw is a huge, huge dog standing up on his back legs. peeking around the side of a tree. Cliche werewolf looking, great big pricked ears, kind of like a Wile E. Coyote snout. They're kind of fat at the end. The hint of teeth. There's no like snarling or growling or anything, but the hint of teeth, a little glint. It's like it was almost like a cartoon. If you had to do a caricature of what I'm saying, you probably hit the nail right in the head. And seeing and especially seeing a hand. I've seen dogs stand up on the back legs before, and I had seen them back then. We used to have Great Danes when I was a child. And Great Danes are, if you're talking to them, especially my father, because he had a dog that really loved him, and he loved her very much. And she used to jump up and put her hands on his shoulders all the time. But seeing this hand, again, not a paw, hand peeking around the side of the tree, it was just absolutely overwhelming. And then the locking eyes with, I'm going to call it a creature for the sake of argument, the locking eyes with the creature and getting the distinct impression that it means you're no good whatsoever. And that sort of realization, it's a very difficult thing, Dick, because my father, I idolized him, I worshipped him. He was the fighter pilot, he was the soldier, and, he was the protector. And then you encounter someone like this that you know full well nobody there can offer any possible resistance against. And it's a real moment of absolute fear. Before I know it, my father's hands are either side of my shoulders. And I remember him turning me towards the direction where the originally being traveled and say, "Come on, boy, we better go." And, looking back on it as an adult, there was a major change in the mood. There was a very distinct lack of the japery that had been going on before, and the pace was slightly quicker. And I often asked myself, had he actually seen something? Or had he simply just seen how terrified I was? And realized, or had a feeling, all those intuition things. Basically, I keep asking myself if he understood or got the drift of the situation, and helped propel me home at a good rate. And then, as I guess most people do, or many people will do, I seem to forget about this whole thing. Being a young man at the time, 10 or 11 years old, your head's full of something new every 10 minutes. So forgetting or having forgotten about this thing, or repressed perhaps is a better word, so we've got this whole damn thing for probably 6 or 7 years, maybe more. I was probably, in fact, I believe I was revisiting Scotland from London, so that puts me around 19 or even 20 years old. Back at the family home, for some reason, somebody's talking about a spooky story or a ghost story or something. And I think more specifically it was a creepy thing that imaginary friend talking to imaginary friend, and all of us being quite creeped out by this. And somebody else saying, perhaps even me, well, you never know. Greater things in heaven and earth, as Shakespeare used to say, or once said. And my father suddenly pipes up, and he said, "It's like that time when we'd been out and when we got home, you were inconsolable. You were crying for a couple of hours, and we couldn't figure out what was wrong with you." And I've got no memory of this to this day. I've got no memory whatsoever of this. I said, "What do you mean?" Again, being the young man just entering my career in the defense sector, not liking to be thought of as a pansy. So what do you mean? No, that never happened. That all those little things you feel brave enough to say to your father when you're 19 or 20. And said, "I don't remember this." And as we dissected it, I suddenly thought, excuse my language, and started joining the dots. And had this horrible, that horrible goose flesh. Everything stands up on your arms, and you get a horrible prickly, itchy feeling. And it sort of all, unfortunately, I say unfortunately because it's left lasting effect on me that I'm most embarrassed to admit. I'm scared of the dark to this day. So it all made sense and congealed, and I remembered it. That either out of shock or self-preservation. Because, if a lamb's bleating out of concern or panic, the wolf's going to get it. So whatever mechanism it was that made me not cry or scream or talk or, go to my father, werewolf, or whatever the damn thing was. When I got home to the safety of the house, apparently I just burst. He said, you just burst. Inconsolable. Tears running down your face. An hour, 2 hours. He said, we just couldn't figure out what was wrong with you. And as embarrassing as that is, that made an awful lot of sense. And for years, and years and years and years, again, after recalling this to my father at that family meeting, you sort of forget about these things. They go to the distant recesses of your mind. And then, for years, chastising myself, why am I scared of the dark? Why am I doing this? I can jump out of an airplane at, 8 to 10,000 feet. I shouldn't be scared of the dark. This is irrational. Pull yourself together, boy. All because my father used to call me boy, even up until the day he died. I must have been 30 by this time. Boy, right to the end. So, that voice I keep chastising myself with is usually his. Pull yourself together, man. Pull yourself together, boy. It just, it doesn't make any sense. And that's one of the biggest problems I have rationalizing. And, I keep getting harassed to go camping. And I just can't do it. I can't do it. I'm just not, and again, being irrational and logical, absolutely, I probably should go camping. And I probably got more risk of being injured in a car trip toward the campsite than being hurt by anything in the wilderness. But, there's going to be a first time for everything, and I don't want that first time to be me. And, whether I like it or not, and whether it sounds silly or not, I trust my gut, and I've got no intention to, go against it just for the sake of going camping, because knowing my luck, again, like I said, it never occurred to me there might be more than one of these things. I saw this thing in Scotland, with no bears, with no wolves, with nothing that could be misconstrued as, this giant, 7 or 6 foot, killing machine, as I've come to think of them recently. I'd never considered the fact there might be more than one. And then I come here and I'm convalescing because of this broken knee of mine. I discovered your podcast because I used to listen to Mysterious Universe. I love all the sciencey stuff. And, I think it's probably from that, people that like this podcast, discovered your podcast. And, all of a sudden, everything hitting home like a bloody sledgehammer in the middle of your forehead, that people are seeing these things, not only, just in Europe, but all over the world, the United States, and unfortunately, a lot in the United States, probably due to the Greater Land mass. But, there we are. So I can't go camping. I keep making ridiculous excuses why I'm not going to go camping. I don't like putting the trash out when it's dark. And, if I do, I will take my girl and my dog with me. And even then when I do that, as I'm leaving the door, and especially recently since this has been in the forefront of my mind after talking to you, I wonder, am I putting my dog at risk? Will it hurt my dog?
Riley, I've got some things to share with you here that I hope you take to heart.
Please do.
The first thing I want to say is that, unfortunately, at the most formative period of your life, you had this encounter. If there was a time in your life that would be the worst time of all to have an encounter, it would be at that 10 to 11 age range. Let's look at the facts now. As a result, you're afraid of the dark. You don't want to go camping. You feel a lot of anxiety when you're out at night in the dark. You also have a lot of anxiety about the idea of going out camping. You have a lot of these other undesirable side effects because of that encounter that you're embarrassed about, but understand all these side effects that you're feeling and experiencing are perfectly normal for an eyewitness. I hope somehow, some way, you're able to get over the embarrassment of experiencing these side effects and are somehow able to get back to good. Just deal with this the best way you can, the best way you know how. No one could ask any more of you I hope somehow by doing that, you can finally get to the point where you accept whatever comes your way as far as emotions go and are somehow able to move on. It doesn't mean that you're not a brave man. It doesn't mean that you're not admirable. It's just a byproduct of having a very unfortunate event occur at a time of your life when you were the most susceptible to being scarred emotionally by such an occurrence.
The trouble is that it goes a little further than that. And the worst of it is, as you mentioned, I know these symptoms are perfectly natural for somebody who's had a traumatic experience. And that's one of the reasons why I feel so silly. Because I know the reactions, I somehow feel I should be immune to them. But further to this, it's not just that, I'm just not going to go bloody camping in the wilderness. It's not just that. There's a little thing inside me that feels a degree of, dereliction by not warning people they shouldn't probably go out there camping. And I know how ridiculous that sounds. I know how uncommon these experiences may be, because having worked in law enforcement, I know a lot of crimes go unreported. And as we know, the stigma that goes along with something like this would lead to an even higher percentage or theoretically, higher percentage of these encounters not being reported. So a little thing inside me hopes that when I don't want to go camping, that my friends that I care about very much will also not go camping. And I feel I might be making or giving them another chance not to die. And I know that may sound ridiculous, but it's like, I probably don't want to admit that this has affected me as much as it has done. But you make some very good points, and some of them are hauntingly hitting home. And like I said, I probably don't want to make as much of this as I should do. It's one of those things. If I may add another detail, back to the encounter. I was talking previously about not really investing in this idea of psychic links and communication without. Well, I'd say communication without talking, but we all do it every day. Something like 80% of human communication is body language. But I had an overwhelming impression that, and again, this sounds so ridiculous when I'm saying it, but I'm going to say it. I had an overwhelming impression that this was not to be talked about. That I think the best way to it was like I said, I got the impression that the thing was pissed off that I'd seen it. It was upset, or that I'd spoiled a plan or an activity. I'd interrupted something by seeing this thing. And during the probably, and again, Vic, it was probably only 3 to 5 seconds, maybe 8 at the max. During this time when I'm locked eyes with this damn thing, all these things, the fear, the feeling of helplessness, the impotence, and again, having that feeling that, my parent, the person that does all the protecting, probably can't deal with this whole situation, even though his buddy Frank's there, and Frank was an army major. Feeling that fish out of water, feeling, like you've suddenly been dropped in, like you're a goldfish in a pool with a shark. Feeling that was pretty bad, but then you have this horrible implication of intelligence and higher thinking. You better not mention this. You shouldn't have seen this. You've screwed up, or you've made a run for your own back. That's the best I can explain it. That's going to explain it. And I'm very, very careful to, if I don't have enough information on something, I don't put forth an opinion. I don't put forth a doctrine or a belief. If I don't know about something, I still don't know about it. But as far as I'll go is I'll retell the facts, or I'll explain the facts. And I had to do this many times when I worked in defense. I wasn't sure of a situation. It wasn't my job to guess what was going on. My job was to report the facts, and that's pretty much how I tend to carry myself. So even in this situation, and I keep hesitating to use the word dogman or werewolf or whatever, because they're not accurate to me because I don't have enough information from my experience. So I really don't feel I've done a good job of getting across what the whole situation, the whole experience, and the encounter. But it's actually a bit more difficult to retell than I thought it would be. I've got no nerves about speaking in front of people. As a teacher to military and police forces, you're dealing with the worst students of the planet. You're dealing with the alpha males and people that think they know all. So public speaking is not the issue, but it's not as easy to articulate as I thought it would be. And I feel I've done a very poor job of getting across, but I've pretty much done my best there.
No, you've done a really good job of getting across the details and your feelings. Now, Riley, in Scotland, after this encounter, did you ever hear about any other dogman encounters happening?
No, not at all. But having thought about this constantly from the first point of contact to waiting for us to formalize this little chat we're having right now, I did a little bit of internet research. Again, because I've got a lot of time on my hand. And a story returned to my memory. It was a great deal further south than where I was stationed at the time. Sorry, lived at the time. In a glen called, oh my god, it was a place called Bridge of Cally, C-A-L-L-Y, in an area around a place called Blair Gowrie, which is B-L-A-I-R-G-O-W-R-I-A, it's called the gateway to the Highlands. So this is where the Highlands actual start. Now, and I even found some stuff on Google about this, and it was quite nice because it brought me back to, my time previously in Scotland when I was a young man. But there was a tale of a thing called the Ghost of Moors. And the Ghost of Moors was a big black dog that would trot along to, solitary travelers, stand up on its back legs, and bark words and intentions at its victims. And because of the time frame this was set in, I believe this is probably early 19th century, people thought it was a devil dog, or that it was Satan, or there was a horrible criminal named Moors, and he was like a cannibalistic, basically what I would like to term in parentheses, a crazy. The idea was that this Moors guy that had been executed was reincarnated as this big black dog. I've no idea the rationale of the mechanism for this, but that's the only other thing I know of in Scotland that even resembles this. And the only way I connected this was that I recall from reading a book about, as a child, a book about ghosts or something. And not even a child, in fact, I was definitely at high school by then, so say between the ages of 12 and 14. In the school library, there was this little, cheaply produced book that had, local, folklore and that sort of thing in it. I think we're probably doing it for book review. Because my father kind of frowned upon all that stuff, being more or Air Force officer, which, he lorded over us freely at every opportunity. I recall reading about this big black dog that used to stand up on its hind legs and, bark words at people. I only made the connection after we talked the other day. Basically because I was just trying to, I don't know, it's just curiosity. But, as I said before, Vic, we have no bears in Scotland. We have no wolves in Scotland. Not wild anymore. We have game reserves, obviously, but, I think there's probably less than 80 wolves in Scotland. And besides, wolves aren't that big. I've seen wolves. One of the reasons I had the courage to come forward is I was comforted by the fact that that people couldn't say, oh, it's probably a bear. Oh, it's probably just a wolf. Oh, it was this, it was that. We don't have anything like that in Scotland, or in the United Kingdom. We have no, the biggest mammal in the United Kingdom is a red deer stag. There's no chance of, recognition issues there. So that's another one of the reasons I had the confidence to come forwards. Because I'm not a fool, I'm not going to burn my name on a whim. In fact, if this story had been, and I know this sounds ridiculous because it sounds crazy as it is, if it had been one teensy bit more, out there, I wouldn't have had the balls to come out and talk to you about it.
Oh, that's understandable. Even the most melancholy encounter is going to be hard to come out and talk about. It's just one of those things that most people find so hard to believe. It's only natural you'd be reluctant to talk about it, but I'm so glad that you and others have been willing to come forward and share the details of your encounter. Now, having said that, Riley, when all is said and done, do you think that coming on the show tonight and sharing your encounter and everything else that's happened as a result of that encounter, do you think that's going to help you in the long run?
I can only wait and see. I mean, apart from the slight bashfulness I feel about, saying these things out loud, knowing full well that they'll go to the ears of people I don't know, and therefore, don't know if I can trust or can trust to be benevolent. I'll be absolutely frank with you, it's a bit of a step. It really is a bit of a step. But, if I have balls to do one thing, I should be able to employ those balls to do other things, should I not?
That's true. Those are good points. Like anything else, especially a complicated situation like what you're going through there, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. I hope that contacting me was the first bite along the way to taking down this huge project that's going to be getting you back to where you need to be so that you can function the way that you want to function. I really hope this does help.
Well, the trouble is, Vic, again, I'm in no great rush to give up my man card. I'm in no great rush to give that up at all. But I literally can't ever see a situation where I'm going to be happy going out camping in the wilderness. Because I'm a pragmatic guy, It's like when I was doing my parachute training. Parachute fatalities are very rare, but they happen. And I was very well aware of the fact that it could be me that time. Because, things fail. And they have to fail for the first time for somebody all the time. All somebody new. And I just don't ever see a situation where I'm doing this because I'm doing what I've always done in my life. I'm mitigating my risks. And yes, I feel foolish about that. Yeah, I might be hampering my life, but having faced mortal danger a few times in my life due to the nature of my work. I know when I see it. I'm not in a rush to do that now anymore, especially since I'm no longer playing an active role. I'm strictly a teacher and instructor now. So, and having, again, being very confident. I used to take great pleasure in, cause I used to have a lot of girlfriends. And when I say used to, it was only a year or so ago. I used to have a lot of girlfriends. And, I used to really enjoy, I used to call it a late night walk, because, my German Shepherd is so adorable, everybody falls in love with her. And, it's always been a habit of mine to walk her very late at night. So I used to take great delight walking along with my beautiful German Shepherd and, a beautiful girl and hearing her say, oh, I feel so safe with you. Knowing for a while it's safe because of me and Wolf. And I used to say, you know what? Practically speaking, there's very little we couldn't deal with. There's very little we could encounter that we couldn't deal with. Almost nothing. I know how to look after myself. I've had an awful lot of training in combat, and you've got this four-legged razor blade here, Wolfarella. And I used to take great delight in the girls feeling safe, because it's a nice thing for anybody to feel. I like feeling safe, for Christ's sake. But every time I said that, this little voice in the back of my head thought, you liar. There's something you know full well what you probably couldn't deal with. And, so it's, like I said, disappointingly, as much as I've forgotten it over the years, it's been a constant thorn in my side. It's returned to haunt me often, and at the most inopportune times in my life. It's always, like I said, it's something that just wouldn't go away, and whether I like it or not has dramatically affected my lifestyle, especially when it comes to nighttime activities like camping. I mean, it's ridiculous that I can't go camping. You know, I did all that bivouac crap back when I used to work in defense. But, you know, there's a lot of us there and we all have guns. I've got no interest. I always say to my friends when they say, do you want to go camping? And I say, I just get paid for that crap. Why would I do that? And, that's one of my get out of jail free cards. I'm just, the truth is I don't like having the knowledge that I'm not prepared for a thing I know to be absolutely true, and B, a risk, no matter how small it is. I don't like that. I just don't like it at all. And I'm not comfortable with it. And I know I'm going to sound like a clown here, but I'm just not willing to put myself at that, risk. It's the old story. You know, it's not important 90% of the time, you know. It's not an issue, you know. So let's just say Dogman isn't an issue 99.9% of the time. But that 0.1% of the time, when it is an issue, it's the issue. It's the most important issue. It's an overwhelming issue. It's an issue that robs you of all other issues. You know, it's the ultimate threat. And I don't know anyone that stands up well to something that is absolutely clearly, certainly for an unarmed individual, you just don't have a hope in hell. Even a big dog, you know, I used to deal with this in class when I was consulting to police in the military. Guard dogs, you know, a German Shepherd. We are bigger, stronger animals. Yes, we're going to get bitten a bit, but, you know, if you or I were being attacked by a German Shepherd and we went animalistic, we went wild, we're bigger and we're stronger. We don't have the teeth, but we could quite easily beat the animal into submission or retreat or even death. And there's a certain comfort to be had from that, especially if you accept the fact you're going to get bitten up. But I'm going to parallel the grizzly bear to the dogman. There's no way you can defeat that. There's no way. In the face of overwhelming odds, a certain humility comes to you, and that humility is admitting that there's times to run and, you know, live to fight another day. And when the option of running is robbed from you too, because this thing that you're going to run from is clearly far more athletic than you, I, or anything else on the planet. And even worse than this, again, going back to, I'm not harping on about it, but going back to my understanding of psychology, predators like dogs and wolves and presumably dogman have a thing called a prey drive, and very often running in those situations incites violence. So that's where I am with that. But thank you very much for your well-wishing and reassurances. And I too do hope that I finally get over this, whatever it is. But it's not going to happen in the next in the foreseeable future. I'm telling you that. I'm smarter than that.
Oh, sure, it's going to take time, no matter what you do. You already know the answer to these questions. You realize that you're just dealing with cause and effect, aftershocks from a traumatic experience. It's just going to be a matter of convincing yourself that it is okay to feel the way that you do feel. That's what it's going to take before you really can start to get better after having experienced this. I hope that is sooner rather than later. Having said that, Riley, do you have any closing comments you'd like to share with us?
Closing comments. I'm finding it difficult to recall what I've said already. However, what I would like to say is, thinking about the broader picture here, I would just encourage anyone that had a genuine encounter with, and not even just this dogman we're talking about, I would just encourage people to speak up for themselves, but in the right company and the right environment. And because these things vary, you know, again, you know, I like to have this opinion that I'm immune to a lot of the things that affect other people. But it's nonsense, obviously. But it's a reassuring thing. And you know, when that fiction you've created fails you, when you can't even pretend that something hasn't affected you badly, it's a bit of a culture shock, and it opens your eyes, and it's very difficult to deal with. So all I'd like to say in closing, I suppose, is you know, there are ways to overcome these things as much as I'm struggling. And again, I really have to promote this sort of, not hysteria or paranoia, but the public awareness element here. And especially after listening to your podcast, it seems that some people unfortunately have repeat encounters with these things. Like that whole thing, if you're high profile, you draw a lot of fire. And why would we not assume the same is applicable with this sort of incident? So, in closing, I would just encourage people to, you know, if people are struggling with these things, or if they've had a traumatic encounter, I would encourage them to find some sort of recourse to feeling better. And you know, I felt in several degrees better just by knowing, not just by knowing, but actually realizing after I contacted you that this is a safe place to talk about this stuff, and getting it off your chest is very therapeutic. And keep up the good work. You know, I think you're, I almost consider it a public service.
Well, Riley, it's such good news to know that I've helped you to any degree possible. That's for sure. And also it's good to know that you realize that you're not any less of a man because of how you reacted to that experience that you had. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing the details of that encounter. This isn't a one-and-done situation. You know, if you ever would like to talk about this again, please do reach out, because I'm not going anywhere.
Sure. Well, I thank you for the opportunity to, you know, thank you for giving me the confidence to, you know, to be able to talk about this. I still feel kind of bashful about the whole thing, but, like I said, there's almost a moral obligation to, you know, to at least, let's put it this way, if I saw a landmine on South Beach, you know, I didn't tell people, I'd feel like if somebody blew their off. So, I've at least paid lip service to my civil responsibility.
Well, it's appreciated. I really do appreciate you coming forward and sharing that so that other people could hear that. That's definitely appreciated. Thanks again so much, Riley, for your time and coming on to the show. Like I said before, please don't be a stranger, okay?
Absolutely, and thank you so much. And thanks for taking so easy on me.
Oh, anytime. That's what I'm here for. Well, thanks again, and have a great night.
All the best, Vic.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. If you've had a dogman encounter and you want to speak with me, whether in private or on the show, you can reach me at contact@dogmanencounters.com. I'd love to hear from you.